Welcome back to the part 2 on the steps to prevent fire outbreak in buildings. This is Delwit Electrical YouTube channel. In the previous section, we were able to talk about the introduction to fire outbreak in buildings and the electrical safety tips that is required to ensure that fire outbreak is being prevented in buildings. In this part 2, we'll be talking about the causes of electrical fire outbreak, the preventive measures to be taken, and we're going to conclude. Now, on the causes of electrical fire outbreak, the most important one on the list is high resistance. Like I said in the previous video on fire disaster, I talked about high resistance, having two entrances, where one you have a big bodyguard and the second one you have a slim bodyguard. Most people will prefer to go through the entrance that has slim bodyguard than to go through the entrance that has big bodyguard. The same thing happens with high resistance. Whenever there is a fault current, the fault current tends to flow towards the area with low resistance. In that case, if your earth does not have a low resistance, definitely you will discover that current would definitely flow to your equipment. And what are the major causes of high resistance? We have the open circuit protection failure. Now, all circuits have protection. If you go to your distribution board in your building, you see there's a circuit breaker that is there. So whenever there is an open circuit failure, you will discover that if your protection devices have failed, it will lead to high resistance, and in that case, it will lead to damage, and so if it's not eliminated, it will lead to fire outbreak. So this is one of the major causes of fire outbreak. The second one is faulty electrical outlets. Now, most electrical outlets, because of the constant usage, you start having arcing. You see what we call spark, those little spark you see on your 13 amp socket. If it's not changed, you say, okay, let me manage it. From managing, it will lead to fire outbreak. So whenever you discover that any of your 13 amp socket, I don't know, you know what 13 amp socket is, where you connect your phones to, and your 15 amps where you connect maybe your AC or your cooker unit. If you start discovering that it's not clipping the way it's supposed to be, it's not getting the content that it's supposed to be, and it's smelling and it's giving little spark, call your electrician, let him change the sockets. Sockets are not expensive. The maximum you could get is 1.5. So you could get that of 500, 600. So please try and change it as fast as possible to prevent fire outbreak. The third point is poor wiring. So poor wire. Now, this arcing leads to high resistance, and that high resistance, they do not have an outlet, so it will damage the equipment that is connected to that port. The third one is poor wiring or old wiring. Now, wiring of buildings is very important. But if the wiring is poor, or those olden days wiring that we have, I believe that those olden days we have good copper content wires, but because of the usage of that time, it might not have the adequate rating that is required. So if you have poor wiring, it's ideal that you change those wiring to standard wiring to avoid high resistance that will lead to fire outbreak. Now, wiring below rated standard. Now, or rated load. Your load, every load has its own rating, and which is covered in the electrical design. So maybe the electrical engineer has designed that for your AC point, you are supposed to use 4 mm. You tell me that, I'm an electrician. For the past 20 years, I've been wiring building and I've been using 2.5. You use 2.5. And because in their own time, they don't have constant power supply, you put on your AC, 8 a.m., 12 noon, by 3 p.m. you have put it off. The wire is not used continuously. But you in your own generation, you are using your AC maybe 18 hours a day. And before you know it, the wire will start smelling. And if you don't even take note, it will lead to high resistance. And from there, you have a fire outbreak. So you must ensure that your wiring is rated to this capacity. Then rather than go there eating up your cables, you will discover that if you have gone to buildings that you have access to the rooftop where half conduit is used, when you guys eat up the cable, maybe you might be fortunate the particular cable that is eating up does not function. But you might be unfortunate that it will eat up the red side and also eat up the black. And along the line, maybe when it's moving, it will bridge both of them. And when they bridge both of them, the live and neutral bridging, you know what that is. So it's advisable that in this modern connection era, you should ensure that you do full conduit, and that will eliminate every aspect of rodents eating up your cable. The second one on the causes of electrical fault outbreak is earthing stroke ground failure. When your earthing or ground failure fails, you will definitely discover that everything about earthing on that building is gone. Even if you have your earth rod and everything on the ground, it's gone. So I told you earlier that I'm going to show you an equipment that is going to talk about how you are going to test for that. So see, if you don't carry out earth resistant test, there's no way you will determine if your earth has failed or not. Because when you are doing the test, maybe you got 2 ohms. After a year or two, you might be getting 20 something, 30 something. In that case, that earthing has failed. You have to do a new one, or you treat that particular one. Short circuiting. Short circuit can occur along your circuit, so you should ensure that whenever you are a circuit is being short circuit. What do I mean by short circuit? Bridging along the line. If you have that, ensure it's eliminated. If not, it's going to cause electrical fire outbreak. Overloaded circuit choke extension. In most multinationals, multinational organizations I've worked for, there is a basic principle that your 13 amp socket is not, no extension is connected to it. And it's for a reason. Because when you connect an extension to your 13 amp socket, indirectly you are overloading that 13 amp socket. That 13 amp socket is rated to carry a load of 13 amp. But by the time you connect an extension bus, within that extension, you are going to put maybe water heater, connecting TV, connecting more than 10 to 11 equipments are connected to that extension. And on the long run, from that extension is going to your 13 amp socket. From that 13 amp socket is going to your breaker, and the breaker you have is rated maybe 15 amps or 10 amps, and you have overloaded that breaker. In that case, once you have overloaded that extension, you have overloaded the 13 amps and you have overloaded the circuit breaker. So it's advised, if you're not using, if it's for a commercial environment, it's advised that extension buses should be eliminated. None of your staff should use extension buses. When you are designing your office, make provision for all 13 amp sockets within your workstation so that everybody knows that, oh, this is what I'm connecting. When you start using multiple sockets or using extension buses, it overloads the point and overloads the circuit breaker at the distribution board. Improper cable termination. Now, I see a lot of people connecting their wires to their 13 amp socket, and you will see SS. When you are using a stripper, you already know the length that is supposed to enter the port of the live, the port of the neutral, and the port of the earthing. So why strip SS? Those SS you are stripping, a time will come whereby the live will have SS, the neutral will have XS, and they will join along the line. So it's advisable that you use the standard measurement that is required to terminate your cable. And when it's terminated properly, there will be no reason why it should join together. Then upgraded facilities. This can cause serious fire outbreak, especially for developing environment, like areas in Lagos, maybe Benin City, whereby a new area was actually a village, but development rapidly met the place. You start saying, it's my grandfather's house, it's my grandmother's house. So instead of you are changing the aesthetics of the building, you are changing the roofing, you are painting, you are doing so many amendments, but you don't change the wiring. Once you are upgraded, those times of your fathers or grandfathers, you discover that they didn't use ACs, they didn't use water heater, but in your own time, you want to use those equipment and you want to loop. In that case, you have upgraded that facilities and you didn't upgrade the cable. There's every tendency by the time you start using the ACs and water heaters with those previous cables, you are going to experience electrical fire outbreak. So these are the major causes of electrical outbreak. And let's see how we can prevent these electrical fire outbreaks. First and foremost is the earth resistance. Please, I've talked so much about earth resistance, and I'll be showing you how you can measure your earth resistance. We have so many products of the earth resistance tester. You have the digital ones, you have the analog ones. This is the digital one. So if you know you can afford this, you could do this and carry out the test yourself. If not, I advise you call the competent electrical engineer that will come with this equipment to measure the earth resistance. It's very important. You should do it at least once a year for residential buildings. Then for commercial buildings, I advise you carry out your test twice a year, one in the rainy season, one in the dry season, to ensure that your resistance is still within the required ohmage that is needed. The second one is cable sizing.
Cable sizing also is quite necessary. This would have been done when the electrical design is being carried out. But unfortunately, when some electricians get to site, they ignore the cable sizing of the electrical design. However, most people do not even bother having an electrical design, so cable sizings are not reflected. They tend to believe the guesswork of the electrical or electrician. So it's advisable that if you have an electrical design, follow strictly the sizing that was presented in the electrical design. Don't say because this have been doing it for the past 20-30 years, you now use a 1.5 mm cable for a 5 horsepower AC. That is not done, that will lead to an electrical fire outbreak. So please kindly have an electrical design for your building and stick strictly to the cable sizing for all connections within your household.
Right, the third point is the standard electrical design. As I've said, it is very important. If you have a standard electrical design and it's adhered to, you cannot have electrical fire outbreak in your building. Protective devices. Most times, a lot of people get their connection directly from their cutout fuse and you go to your distribution board, which is not ideal. I always advise that there must be a protective devices between your cutout and your distribution board, and I recommend a jet switch. So this jet switch is very important. So please, if your building doesn't have a gear switch, please try as much as possible to install one. It will serve as a protective device whenever there is an overcurrent trying to come into your building. Recording of faults. This is very, very important. As we speak in Nigeria, we don't have a database where faults are being recorded in. But in other advanced countries, you see that there's a database for fault recording within various establishments. Like there's a particular instance whereby I had an earth pit and immediately I measured, I got 2 ohms. But when NEMSA came for their installation, they have to carry out their own test. Within 3 weeks, what I measured 2 ohms, I was getting 27 ohms. And they said my installation was wrong. But later I discovered that what was done is that they have an asphalt covering my earth pit. So there was no penetration of water. So that particular fault should have, if I was looking for a place to record it, because I know that there's every tendency that an engineer might have such similar experience in the future. But I went to the Korean website, there's no fault recording. I went to the NSC website, no fault recording. I went to NEC website, no fault recording. So I use this as a recommendation to whosoever is watching this video to recommend to the current team that there should be a database where fault is recorded, so that when future researchers or future engineers are going towards experiencing such faults, they could check online and see how those faults were prevented. The sixth one is fire extinguisher.
Fire extinguishers are very important. You use it to extinguish fire whenever there is a fire outbreak, electrical fire outbreak. So it's advisable you put at least the 5 kg or 2 kg fire extinguisher close to wherever your distribution board is, or any connection to any connecting equipment, heavy duty equipment is, so that whenever there's a fire outbreak, you could extinguish it with the fire extinguisher.
Number 7, warning signs. Most times when you're in your apartment or your offices, you will hear some electrical smells, but most times we tend to ignore them. These are signs that tend to lead to fire outbreak. So I advise that you take those signs seriously by calling a competent electrician to come fix them up. Number 8, you have to keep cords and cables away from rug. Most times when you are passing your cables or extension cords, which we have advised that we shouldn't use, you pass your extension cords across rugs or carpet. This is usually a very high cost of fire outbreak. So please try as much as possible not to put your extension cables or cords across rug, because whenever there is a fault, from there it will lead to a fire outbreak. Faulty electrical appliances. Most times we use faulty electrical appliances, we say let's manage. Those ones can lead to a fault, and from there it will lead to fire outbreak. So whenever your electrical equipment is damaged, give it to an electrician to fix it before you use them or connect them to power source. Your socket, DB and circuit breaker to be overloaded. I've said that overloading with extensions is not good. So whenever you overload your circuit breaker, most circuit breakers have been designated for 15 amps. But most times when you connect your load to it, you are connecting high loads to them, which will trigger the circuit breaker. And if the circuit breaker is not of good quality, it might lead to a fire outbreak. Finally, worn out to faulty outlets to be replaced. Whenever any of your socket points is faulty, get a competent electrician to fix them up. So I believe these are the major points we've talked about, the causes and the preventive steps to be taken to prevent fire outbreaks. So today we are going to be concluding that for you to prevent fire outbreaks in buildings, you must follow the precautions that we have listed, from the pre-installation to the post-installation to the operators and to the end user. All these are important to ensure that your fire outbreak is being eliminated for buildings. So I believe that we can make Nigeria safe, we can make the world safe, and and we can prevent fire outbreak from buildings if we follow these steps that have been outlined. I believe I've been able to educate you and to teach you on the basic steps to take to prevent fire outbreak. Feel free to click on the notification icon to get more updates from Delwit Electrical YouTube channel. Thank you very much.